Hello and welcome to the Queen's Couch Podcast with our amazing host, Dr. Tanika Victoria. She curates a space for women where all women are encouraged to collaborate and do not collide. Join us on the couch tonight. Hello, and welcome to the Queen's Couch. You are here for another episode, and we are excited to have you join us on tonight. So, just a few housekeeping rules as we go on for tonight. Make sure you are liking and you are subscribing to our channel, and make sure you're making comments because the guests want to hear what you're saying. We want to hear what you're saying, Queens. So, we are excited about you being on the couch. Tonight, I have none other with me than Miss Tiffany Myers, and we are talking about caring for the caregivers. Thank you so much for joining us on tonight. Introduce yourself and tell everyone who you are.
Coach Tanico, good evening, good evening, good evening. I am Tiffany Myers. I am the caregiver coach concierge. I am the caregiver. I am the voice of the caregiver, actually. And the reason I am the voice of the caregiver is because I went through caregiving. I went through the trials. I went through the tribulations of being a caregiver. But I also learned some things that the caregiver is a voiceless person that needs a support system, that needs people to know their story, that needs someone to understand their plight and needs someone to speak up for them because one, either they're too busy, two, they can't say it because they don't know how to articulate it, or three, they're just too tired to say it and they need someone to speak up for them. And I also created a caregiver journal because in my caregiving journey, what I found was I was taking so much time caring for everyone else, I wasn't caring for myself. So I am Tiffany Myers. I am the caregiver coach. I'm a transformational life coach. And whenever you care for yourself, whenever you self-care and you're caregiving, there has to be some type of transformation. So that is me. How are you?
Here we go. Thank you so much for sharing that. That is amazing. So you're the caregiver coach. Tell us, how did this journey start? You said you were a caregiver and you had to learn some things along the way so that you could be to others what someone wasn't for you or what you needed. So tell us how this journey started, where you said, "Hey, I need to be a caregiver's coach. I feel that there's a great need." What made you just dive head into it?
Listen, I came into it by default. It was so crazy. So my husband had to have a double lung transplant. Prior to him having the transplant, he had to have a caregiver. So in 2018, he was diagnosed with, he's lived with sarcoidosis for 15, 20 years. He lived with it. He thrived with it. He would have his bouts with it. He would bounce back. Things was good. Life was great. However, in 2018, he developed a condition called MAC, MAC. M is in Mary, A is in Apple, C is in Charlie. MAC is Microbacteria avium complex. Basically, it's a bacteria. He had sarcoidosis in his lungs. It got in his lungs, and basically the bacteria was like the flu, COVID, and pneumonia had a baby, and it was the strongest baby ever. And because he had that, he had to come out of work. He had bouts with it since 2018. However, and he got better. But then once he got better, what happened, we found that the doctors, he had a special lung team and everything. We were in Charleston back and forth, but we had lived in Charleston, so he already had doctors there. But in 2018, I started to having kind of caring for him, working, doing the full-time mom thing, doing a wife thing, and just caring for him at home. And this was pre-COVID. So we didn't know what this looked like for somebody to be this sick. And it was like, hold on, wait a minute. But then the doctors were like, okay, your lungs are trash. And maybe in 5 to 10 years, you might have to have a lung transplant. And that was in 2022 sometime. So we were like, oh, okay. And they were like, we're just going to keep checking in with you. Well, no, that was in 2020, 2021, 2022. Yeah. And we were like, okay. But then fast track, less than 6 to 9 months later, they were like, you need a lung transplant. he had to have a lung transplant, and he got so bad he went from having to be on like 1 or 2 liters of oxygen with a portable air oxygen tank to having to actually be on those big tanks. You know those big tanks that you see
Mhm.
that people will
Yes.
pull around behind them. He had to be on up to, like, if he walked from, maybe, if we look at the distance between you and I on the couch, if he went from one end of the couch to the other end of the couch, what would happen was he would be out of breath, like totally. And he was on like 6 to 8 liters, sometimes more, because he was just that distressed. And that's how I became his caregiver, because I was already doing it part time, but then I went into it full throttle. And in going into that, and he said, I don't want to do a transplant. Then he got so sick, he said he did want to do a transplant. I was caring for him. And we then had to begin to go back and forth to Charleston weekly. In October 2022, we started having to go back and forth to Charleston weekly. Um, I stopped working. Let's talk about it. I lost my job, but God knew that I needed to be out of work to care for him, because there was no way that I could go back and forth to Charleston, care for him full time, and take care of a job and pay attention to them both. It was too taxing. So that's how I became a caregiver. But then I didn't think about being a caregiver. I was just thinking, okay, I'm just the wife. I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing in this role, taking care of him. If it was me, he would do the same thing. But in doing that, it got so to the point where, as a caregiver, you may have to do anything. Doing anything means that you may have to bathe the person that you love. Um, you may have to fix their meals. You may have to do everything. Caregiving entailed for me ordering his medication, keeping track of that on a day-to-day basis, because he started getting a lot of medications. At one point, I know he was up to over 20 plus meds at one time. So having to make sure that those are ordered, make sure that everything, make sure he takes them, make sure that he eats. He was on a feeding tube because he had lost so much weight. They said that if he kept losing weight, then he was going to not even be considered for a lung transplant. So that means that I'm trying to have to keep up with his food and feeding him and making sure that he eats. But whenever you sit, you don't have an appetite. Now, Taniko, I don't cook. I don't like to cook.
But you had to
I
cook, right?
I don't like to cook. I'm being honest. I don't like to cook. That's not my thing. That's not my ministry. I'm not one of those wives. Oh, let me just cook my husband. That's not me. It's never been. And as a caregiver who has someone that doesn't have an appetite, that's a challenge. But that was something that I had to do. Either I had to cook or I had to go and get his food. So that was one of the things. And all of these things culminated into a day-to-day struggle. And then the trips back and forth to Charleston, he couldn't help me with any of the bags. We had to pack weekly. I kept a couple bags packed so that whenever we would come home, I could change things out. I could grab another one if I hadn't switched everything out in the next bag, so that we could take that week, because we were going from Monday or Sunday to Thursday or Friday. We come back a day, and then we go right back to Charleston. And that was from October until March. Well, yeah, October until March, weekly trips. So that was part of the caregiving journey. And guess what? Even being a caregiver, you see other caregivers as you're in and out of the hospital, as you're in and out of the rehab facility. So that was my journey. And what I realized was I wasn't taking care of myself. I wasn't being a good steward of me, because I was taking care of him. My focus was on him. Once he had his transplant, once he got better, once the doctor released him, 3 months after the transplant, we were still in Charleston, but we had to stay full time. I was still taking care of him. And you have to be there as a caregiver full time to take care of your person, your loved one. And who's to say that you even want that responsibility?
Mm-hmm.
What I found was, even there in Charleston, while I was caring for him, there were other people who were caring for someone, but I could see the stress on their face. being in tune enough to even see someone who was tired, someone who had so much stress on them. There was this one lady in the hospital one day, her husband was diagnosed with myeloma. So it was just a matter of time. She had people calling her, asking her for things, asking and trying to get her to do things for them when she had a load on herself. And I was like, I was just standing by her and I said, why don't you take 5 minutes for yourself? And she said, but I can't. I said, but you can. Now, I wasn't taking that same advice for myself.
I understand.
I wasn't, but I could see it all over her. I said, you know what? I said, ma'am, I said, go and sit outside because we were close to where the balcony is where she could sit outside. I said, go and sit outside, put your phone down. I said, your husband is in here in the hospital. He's taken care of. Let them take care of him and you go take care of you outside for 5 minutes. Just sit down, rest, breathe, and just relax. I said, because you're too stressed. So that was part of the journey as I started stepping into it. That's why I said I came into it by default. Once my husband had his his transplant, it was nothing for me to walk around in the hospital, pray for people, pray with people, talk to people who were going through a journey and just listen. And a lot of times that's what caregivers need. They need a support system. They need someone to listen to them. They need someone to understand. They need someone to see them because a lot of times you see the patient, but you don't see the caregiver that's giving everything of themselves and nothing is being poured into them. It wasn't until I got back home 3, 4 months later, 5 months later, that one day I couldn't get out of bed. I literally was laying in bed, crying my eyes out, like just boo-hoo crying. I was, I was heavy. Literally, it felt like bricks was laying on my shoulders. Felt like something was laying on my head. And my husband was like, "What is wrong with you?" I was like, "I don't know." And it was everything that I had done had come down on me because I wasn't caring for myself. I wasn't taking time for who I was. I wasn't even taking time to acknowledge what I had been through because there were days with caring for him. I had to carry up and down the stairs each time we came home, either carry down leaving or carry back up. And thank God for the carts at the hotel because I had a 28, 32 pound um uh uh it's the oxygen machine that sits where it replaces, it's the electric version, and it continually regenerates the oxygen. And that I had to take up and down the stairs. One day I looked down the stairs and I was like, if I fall down these stairs, who's going to take care of him? Who's going to take care of him? Who's going to be responsible for him if anything happens to me? Thank God nothing did. That's the journey of a caregiver because so many times you want to be good for you, but you're not thinking about you want to be good for your person, but not good to you.
Mm-hmm.
You neglect self, you neglect who you are. So that's how I came to be a caregiver and how I came to be a caregiver coach. I fell into that because there were so many people that I would talk to, that I would minister with, that I would just, are you taking time for yourself? What did you do for yourself today? Did you go and get a drink? Are you drinking water? Are you eating? Because we forget about it.
Mm-hmm.
We neglect ourselves so much. And a lot of times you can tell it, you can see it, but you don't do anything about it. So I had to be not just proactive for me, I had to be proactive for other people. And
Yes.
in doing this, I found that there were so many people that needed someone to be their voice. So that's how.
That's amazing. And it often happens like that. When you get into something and you get into your call and you get into your purpose, and it always happens
Yes.
through a trial that you walk through. And you walk through a trial, and
Yes.
sometimes you walk through it alone, because you're that pioneer, because you're that trailblazer. And when you're walking through it alone, you look back and you say, I don't want anybody else to walk alone. I don't want
Right.
anyone else to not have what I didn't have. And so you just want to be what you didn't have to somebody else. And so
Right.
that is amazing. And so as you are going in as you're coaching, what are some key elements that you feel a caregiver needs as support? Because sometimes we're strong and we just want to care for that person ourselves. And
Mhm.
sometimes we decline the help. So, what are some things that you feel a caregiver really needs to embrace in order to effectively care for this care for their loved ones, and sometimes their parents, it's husbands, sometimes
Yes.
it's even children that have
Exactly.
terminal illnesses, and you love them so much. But
Mhm.
how can you start to be able to care for yourself so that you won't break down and really support them? So what are some things that, someone starting this journey, they don't know what to do? What would you tell them with some key things they need to really realize?
Key things. One, you have community, and community doesn't always mean that it's family or blood family, but community. But they need to know. The next thing is use your voice, speak it out loud. Um, one example was we had to have a backup support person, and everybody has something to do. Everyone has something to do, but you have to understand you have community, you have someone there, you have people around you that will help you, but they don't know you need help if you don't say it. They don't know what that help is, and sometimes they don't want to impose because they don't want to offend you, because a lot of times, and be humble, be very humble, understand that people aren't trying to take over, but they're just trying to reach out, they're just trying to help you, your situation, who you are and where you are. And let's talk about pride. Pride will
Mhm.
have you stuck. Pride and ego will have you alone, and pride and ego will have you in isolation. Understand that you don't have to be isolated. Understand that you have the physicians there, you have the medical staff there, and understand that those people are there to help as well. Not only that, one key thing is if you have to get psych, psychiatric help, psychological help, please get it, because a lot of times it may be offered to the patient, but the caregiver needs it as well,
Mhm.
because you need specific tools, and sometimes you may be going through a mental crisis before you go into being a caregiver. So those are key elements. Your voice is key. People don't know what you need until you say it out loud. People don't know that you need help until they know that you need help. People don't know that you may be going through a crisis, or you need, there was one day, the one day that my husband told me he could not get dressed on his own. We had to go to Charleston. It was an emergency. I wasn't staying up here. I mean, Columbia, I love y'all, but I was not staying up here to go to the emergency room because just didn't understand his situation. They didn't have the capacity for it. It was raining that day. I had to get all the stuff ready. I wasn't ready that day. And one person told me, actually, it was two people that said, you should have called me. There are so many people that will say, you should have called me, and they mean it. So understand who your community is. You have community, you have that support system. So identify those people. One of the things with my journal is you can identify those people and what do you need? Please
Mhm.
drink and eat. Another key element. Those are things that are key, because one, you want to be healthy. Two, you want to be well. Three, you want to know who you can call. You want to have their numbers at the ready. And you want to have people that check on you. And for God's sakes, don't do this. When they say, how are you doing? And you're not doing okay, say you're not okay.
Yes. Yes.
Say you are not okay. Say I cannot do this today. because there are times when you cannot do it.
Mm-hmm.
And when you get to see, there are warning signs before you get there, but those are times whenever you have to step away. Because think about whenever you don't step away and then you begin to take your frustration out on your loved one.
Mm-hmm.
Because just like you said, there are people who are caring for parents, there are people who are caring for children, there are people who are caring for their spouses, and there are sometimes people caring for their sister, brothers, aunties, or loved ones, or either
Mm-hmm.
just someone that they know and they took on the responsibility. But the thing about it is, there was someone who had a brother and they bowed out
Mm-hmm.
because they said, one, the person was too mean, but they said they couldn't do it. And be honest. Honesty, when you can't, you can't. It's okay to be honest
Mm-hmm.
because you become resentful if you don't. So those are some of very key elements. Those are some very key points that I want to bring up. And this is my mantra for caregivers. Take 5 minutes every day. If you can't take but the five, take five. Take five. Go sit in the bathroom. The bathroom was my secret place. It was my hiding place. Go sit in the bathroom. Take 5 minutes for yourself. And when I say 5 minutes, I'm talking about 5 minutes where you're not thinking about what medication you need to administer. You're not thinking about where do we need to go, not thinking about what doctor's appointment you have next. You're not thinking about what bag do I need to pack. You're not thinking about okay, did I miss this? Did I wash clothes? Did I pack the kids' lunch? Did I call this person? Did I follow up on this? Do I have this to do at work? Because a lot of times that's what you're thinking about. You're not thinking about yourself. You're not thinking about, I need to shut everything down and just be.
That's
So those,
good. That is
go
good
ahead.
thinking about just being. And it's so funny. And when I think about a caregiver, I remember I was listening to this sermon, and they talks about Job's wife, and everybody talks about Job's wife, and she said, "Curse God and die." But all of the things that happened to Job happened to her.
To her.
Plus, she was the caregiver,
She was.
and so her kids died too. She lost all the money too. And then the one person that she had left was literally, she was caring for him too. And
She
so when
was.
she snapped, because she really did love her husband,
She
because he ain't left
did.
her.
That's right.
He didn't leave her because he knew that that moment was really not her. And let's talk about how sometimes caregivers can just, you lose it all. You like, because before she became the caregiver, she was mourning all her kids. She was
Hmm.
mourning the loss of everything she had,
That's
her
right.
servant, her maid, and then on top of that, she became the caregiver. Because before,
Yes.
sometimes trauma before you even get to being this full time caregiver. So
That's
she just
right.
thought, listen, if you go ahead and die, I can just go ahead and just completely be done with it all. But that
That's
really
right.
wasn't what she meant, And
Mm-mm,
so when you think about that, I think about a caregiver, because
mm-mm.
sometimes it's not all just sitting there, just smiling and enjoying taking care of that person. It's hard.
No,
It's
it
not
is hard.
easy. It's hard work emotionally, on your body, just all the things you have to remember, worrying about the finances. If you're a wife now, you're thinking about, how are we going to take care of our home? How are we going to take
Hmm.
care of our children? Because you have children. So all of these things come into play when you're
Yes.
taking care of a spouse. And even when you're taking care of your parents, where are they going to live with me? Who's going to be
Hmm.
there during the day? How am I going to take care of them? Just navigating your whole life.
Exactly.
And, some people don't have the capacity for that. But let's
Mm-hmm.
talk about that. How can you, because you talked about having resentment and being honest and open. So, what are some things that you can tell someone if you're starting to feel that resentment? You're starting to feel like, listen, I don't want to do this anymore.
Mhm.
Where should they turn? What should they do? Is that the point when they need to say, I need to get me a caregiver coach, or I need to talk to a counselor? What do they need to do in those moments when they're like, I can't take this more. I'm tired of taking care of them. I'm tired of the doctor's appointments. I'm tired of not having my life. When what should they do at that point?
At that point, really, you need to sometimes sit in that moment and understand how far gone am I, because there are levels to that. Are you at the point where you just need to really, you just, first of all, take a minute and step back. Don't say anything, because sometimes our mouth can get us in a world of hurt because we'll lash out. So sit and acknowledge that and understand, do I need to call a friend? Do I need to step away? Do I just need to be quiet? Do I need to, is, will 5 minutes fix this?
Mm-hmm.
If 5 minutes is not going to fix it, because you took your 5 minutes, you did take your break, and you tried to decompress. Okay, now do I need to call a counselor? Do I need to call a coach? Do I need a coach? Do I
Mm-hmm.
need to, and acknowledging that, because sometimes if that thing doesn't go down, because I'll put it like this, sometimes I get so frustrated, it felt like it was right here, like in my ears, like it had come up. Whenever your temperature, you know how you have a temperature, whenever your temperature, my temperature felt like it was up here sometimes. And in those moments, what I would have to do, like literally either being so tired or being so frustrated, those were two things that were huge for me, being tired and frustrated. My tiredness was one of the things, how I dealt with that. I would have to stand in that moment and say, okay, sometimes, and I'm going to tell you how I did it, dealt with it honestly. There were sometimes, one day when I got so tired, I was so tired, I didn't know how I was going to make, how we were going to make it to Charleston. I had to drive to Charleston at that time. I didn't know how I was going to make it. I had finished taking the stuff outside, and I had one more thing to get. It was the concentrator, the 28, 32-pound concentrator that I had to take downstairs. I had water in a bottle. It was about this much water. And I said, God, if you let me drink this much water and just let me make it to the hotel, I'm going to be okay. That was a level of just being tired. That was just tiredness. That was
Mm-hmm.
just tiredness. That was in that moment. One moment when I was frustrated, my feelings got hurt so bad. And it was because the person that you're caring for, they'll hurt your feelings because they're sick. They'll hurt your feelings because they'll lash out. And I was frustrated. I was mad. Tears just rolled down my face. Tears just, and in that moment, I was like, I could just leave all this right here. Like I could just go and just not turn back. That's where my mind was. That's where my mind was. However, my heart said, stop, stop. Recognize who's speaking. Recognize he can't breathe. Recognize his frustration. Recognize where he is. And in acknowledging where he was, that pulled me back to say, okay, pull yourself together. Get this cry out. Get this good cry out. Because sometimes you just got to cry.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just say that. I don't care if you male, female, young, old. I don't care who you are. Sometimes you pouring out that cry, you getting out that cry just makes you feel better because you've been bottling up some emotions anyway. There were days that I would just have to call a girlfriend or a coach. I got a couple coaches and they happen to be girlfriends, but I would call them. Now I had my strong four. No, five. I had my strong five.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say these people would pick up, Like if I would call, they would pick up because they knew. And it wasn't just that they would pick up, they would actually call and check on me as well. They made it their business to call. How are you doing? Because you always, you got that strong friend that's always strong and don't never need anybody.
That was you.
There for everybody all the time. Mm-hmm. And your strong friends are guilty of being strong in their most weak and vulnerable moments whenever they need people. Mm-hmm. They made it their business to call and check on me. And they made it their business to listen whenever they heard when I said, I'm all right. Because it was like, I'm okay, just let me get off the phone. Like, I don't feel like being bothered right now. You have to listen for what they're really saying. Listen and understand whenever that person needs to talk and they need to get it out. Or either they just need to laugh, because laughter helps. Like, there were some times I'm like, y'all know what? And they would just listen in those moments. But they knew. But I had my strong five. Like my strong five, one of my strong fives is my mom. I would call she was like, hey, what's going on? How y'all doing? She's so sweet. My mom's so prim and proper. She's so sweet. Hey, how you doing? You all right today? She'd ask about George. She'd ask about me. She'd ask about the dog. If the dog wasn't there, because they kept the dog. She was reporting on the dog. Her and my dad. This was the funniest thing. One day, her and my dad were fussing about treats that they had to give the dog. But it was a funny moment today. I'm like, I know she's not calling me about treats for the dog, but she called me about treats. But you know what? It took me to a place of joy. Mm-hmm. And taking me in that place of joy, it replaced any frustration that I had. So, and then, like I said, I had coaches. I didn't have to have a counselor, but he had to have a counselor because anxiety walked in the house, and I saw anxiety walk in the house like she was a mistress. I was so happy. I was joyful. But we had the psychiatrist and psychologist. He had them, and I was grateful. And they even checked on me. Like when he had appointments, I had an appointment. Mm-hmm. It was a twofold. But they really literally checked in on me because they said that they see caregivers, but they didn't see a caregiver that was as engaged. And they actually took time to ask, hey, how are you doing today? What is going on? So I had that as well. But I think I may have acknowledged or talked about something maybe once, because it was just, how do we deal with this? But that was it. But I acknowledged it because there were just times it was like, this is a lot. This is a lot. Mm-hmm. And in coming out of those moments, like I said, I had access to those people and those things. And sometimes I just had to walk away. Mm-hmm. And walking away doesn't mean that you don't care. See, that's the thing. A lot of times caregivers feel like if they walk away, and I'm not talking about walking away permanently. I didn't walk away permanently.
No, I understand.
I'm just clear because, sometimes people will take what you say out of context.
Yes, like, oh, she just left the man sick.
She just left.
She didn't leave him sick, y'all. No.
I didn't. We still together. But no, sometimes you have to actually walk away. You have to walk away from the person. You have to literally disconnect at the time so that you don't say something that literally would hurt their feelings and hurt their healing as well. Mm-hmm. And hurt you. Because words sometimes you can't come back from. Yeah. And in the heat of the moment, you don't want to say anything that's just a momentary frustration that you are going to get beyond if you just disconnected, if y'all were just not in the same room. And we were in the same hotel room. We were in the same room all the time. Like, we shared personal space so much. And there were sometimes Taniko, there were sometimes literally what we had to do. I found in caring for him, he was at a point where because he couldn't breathe well, he couldn't see well. Whenever we don't breathe, we don't realize that our sight goes too because oxygen is not getting to
The sight. Okay.
our exactly. And I would read scripture because he was like, it would calm him with the anxiety. And he would say, can you read scripture to me? In reading the scripture, that gave us a calm. Like I can't even describe the peace in the middle of literally a storm that would come in between us, that would come in our space, that would come wherever we were in those moments when anxiety felt like it was taking over and trying to strangle him and snuff his air out. He would ask me to read scripture. And even if I was tired, I could be dog tired. But reading scripture, I would get through the scripture and we would listen to music. We would listen to worship music. We would listen to sermons. And in listening to that, it would ease, like it would calm. It would literally calm. Now, let me tell you, he had drugs to help him too, and they were necessary. But you know what? As a caregiver, you have to know what your person needs that's going to help them, and that in turn helps you.
Mm-hmm.
So if he needed a drug, he had anxiety medication, and then they had to go to psychiatric medication because there are levels to it.
Mm-hmm.
Because the anxiety was so bad because he couldn't breathe. Listen, I was calling them people one night. I was like, I don't know what fellow is on call, but tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock, I'll be at the drugstore. But those were just things that would help me. And in helping me being the caregiver, that helped me be a better caregiver. That helped relieve my stress. That helped relieve anxiety that I didn't know that I was dealing with. That helped relieve that. That helped relieve some of the frustration. It helped take some of that pressure off of me. So those were just some of the things that I had to do, in those moments and in those times to be able to really get through, to push forward. Because some days I didn't know how I was going to get forward or move forward. And that those were times whenever it was like, okay, this is what you need to do. These are the steps you need to take. This is who you need to call. There were days there were days, the day that I was so depressed, I called one of my 5 and I was like, I don't know what's going on. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. And when you have 2 people that's like, or one person, she was like, I need to get off work. I need to come over to the house right now. Mm-mm. You don't want to talk to anybody when it was depression. It was depression that was setting in. I was like, no, depression will tell you don't want to see anybody. Now, for a couple days, I really couldn't get up out of the bed. Like I could not. I didn't know that I was so stressed until I thought I had muscles. I thought I had muscles. It was not muscles. It was that I was so stressed. Everything on me was tight. And all that came down. And when all that came down, my body did something different. But 2 of my 5 said, we're taking you out of the house. Give us 1 or 2 days and we're coming to get you. And they took me out of my situation. They picked me up out of the house and was like, we're going somewhere else. So that's why community is so important. That's why you can't isolate yourself as a caregiver. And your caregiving community, like I said, they may not be family. My 5 isn't blood related to, all of them aren't blood related to me. One, she would just literally catch me like in the spirit and be like, she would just call and be like, hey, what you doing? And she would check on me. But that was my community. even from a physician perspective, from a medical community perspective, they would call and they would be like, "Hey, how's things going?" They would talk to me all the time anyway. He wasn't talking because he couldn't have breathe, so they were talking to me all the time anyway. And they were like, "How are you doing?" They saw me sleeping in the hospital one day, and this was one of the doctors that he had before the transplant team. And she said, "I was not going to wake you up because you were in the hospital and you were sleeping, and I know you needed rest." That's when your community knows what you need.
Mm-hmm.
So there were times when I would call on the different people, and you have to know you. So acknowledge yourself, acknowledge when you need to just walk away, and acknowledge I need to call somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And just be honest with yourself, and don't think that your loved one feels slighted whenever you do that. They don't. They will appreciate that you're taking care of and getting the care you need. They appreciate that. Even if they don't know how to articulate it, they appreciate it because they know if you're better at caring for them.
Mm-hmm. That's good. Let's talk a little bit about your journal. Tell us what's in your journal. Um, what benefits can a caregiver that's caring for someone have from getting your journal? What are some things in it, and how does it help them in their journey as they're caring for someone else?
So my journal is, oh my gosh, my journal is chock full of stuff. What I found was I needed to be able to journal. You know, you just journal, you just have that empty space where you journal. That was one of the things I wanted to make sure I included, and I did. But I also included prayers, personalized prayers, because there were times I could not pray for myself. Let's just be real. Sometimes you are so stressed, and sometimes life comes at you so hard that you really can't pray for yourself. So I put scripture on some of the pages as well. I also put a food journal. I put a water journal. I put stickers in there. There are pages where you can color. Do you know how much you release whenever you can color, whenever you're just like you're just having fun or you're doodling? You know, I put stickers in there. Like, who doesn't love stickers? Like, I'm grown and I love stickers.
Yeah, me too. I love stickers.
But there's a section where there are stickers in the journal. There's also a budgeting section because, just like you said earlier, whenever you are caring for someone, whenever life happens, and what happens whenever we didn't, they said 5 to 10 years, it was less than 9 months we had to face a transplant. We hadn't saved for that. And then I had lost my job. Now, I told y'all he hadn't worked since 2018. God, where is money coming from? But there was a budgeting section because you have to keep up with new medications that you're not taking. You have to keep up with household expenses. Keep in mind, we were going back and forth to Charleston. We had to keep and maintain the place where we were staying here. And then we had to have expenses and pay for things and gas and all that type stuff whenever we were in Charleston. So you got to keep your budget and your finances straight. There is just a section where, what did you do to take care of yourself today? There's a brain dump section. Yes, all of this is in the journal. And the reason I did this, so when I created the journal, I created it. There are tabs so that you know what sections are there. And the
Mm-hmm.
reason, and I had a caregiver that actually helped me create this as well. It was another caregiver, and she was like, "Oh my God, this is amazing." Because whenever we get journals, they may focus on one thing or the other. And I was like, you
Mm-hmm.
know what? From a caregiver's perspective, we're focusing all on everything. And if we put it, and one of the other things about the journal, after you get from the first page where I tell you why I created it, and then I tell you, I give you a prayer, then the very next page that you go to, it tells you to sit and breathe. Shh, just be. Once again, just be. sit and breathe. How many times is a caregiver up? There was rarely any time that I sat down, and even whenever I sat down, I was still thinking.
Mm-hmm.
I was constantly on. I was constantly going. Even when I was sitting in the car, I was constantly going. I was constantly on. What do we have to do when we get there? I have to unpack. We have this appointment. We have to go here. We have to go there. I was in next week and I hadn't even gotten there yet. Didn't even know if I was going to make it. So that's why there is so much encompassed in the journal. And like I said,
Okay.
there is a brain dump section because there were some things I really just needed to get out of my head.
Mm-hmm.
And what are you thankful for? There's a section with that on one of the pages. What are you thankful for? What was, what stood out to you today? What meant the most to you today? What do you need to do? So that's what is all in the journal. It's that and so much more. I don't want to give it away because I want people to go to the website so that they can get the journal or
Yes.
reach out to me.
Yes. So tell them how they can get your journal.
So they can you can either contact me directly, you can inbox me on Facebook, you can inbox me on Instagram, or you can go to my website at www.tiffanyLmyersconsulting.com, and you can order it. There is a products section or a shop section on my website, and you have the journal. It's called the Caregiving Journal. And you can order the journal. That does you also have to pay for shipping so that I can ship it to you. If you reach out to me directly, I can order it, or I do have some on hand. I can send it to you. But the journal is amazing. It really, really is. Is such a big help. There are people who, I'll say, one of the nurses purchased the journal and she said, she got a journal for a couple of other people. She said, I know I'm going to get another one. She said, because this journal made me sit down and acknowledge and write down the things that I had not been acknowledging and writing down for so long. She said, it made me focus. And that spoke volumes to me for her to say that as a nurse. I was looking towards the caregivers that are caring for just their personal family members, their loved ones, the person that, it's their person. I didn't know that it spoke so much to a caregiver that's in the actual medical field, caring for someone or caring for people who also cares for someone else that's their person. So that spoke volumes to me. I mean, there have been other people that said, whenever they turned to the first page and they said it made them sit down, it was huge. So yes, that's where they can get the journal from.
Okay. So I've put it up here where you can see
Yes.
the website www.tiffanyLmyersconsulting.com, and so that's where you can find the journal. I love the fact that you said you added brain dumping. I brain dump all the time just because that's something I love, and the fact
Yes.
that you didn't just have pages, because I'm not a journaler, but I am a doodler and I am a color. And so
Right.
those are the things that make me, when I'm in a moment, to kind of calm down. And it could
Mm-hmm.
be, if you could be caregiving for your loved ones, and as you said, a nurse. There's so many people that care for others, and they say that they're tired, but sometimes they're experiencing compassion fatigue because they just take
Mm-hmm.
on the care of the family and
Exactly.
the everything that's going on. So this will be a great journal if you're a nurse, if you're a teacher, especially if you're
Mm-hmm.
with children with trauma, just
Yes.
school counselors, because you want to stop and take a moment for you, because you're
Yes.
always hearing over and over. You're always on the go. How am I going to help this person? How am I going to
Mm-hmm.
care for this person? So
Right.
definitely the caregiver's journal would definitely be a great thing to have,
It is.
because it covers so many things. It covers the whole gamut from budgeting. Hey, are you
Yes.
taking care of yourself? Self care. your emotional well-being, and just your spiritual self-care, because you need to have a connect. You need to have God to sometimes be in spaces where you're caring for people and you're
Mm-hmm.
constantly not knowing what's going on. You got to learn how to find the joy in this whole process. And if you're not connected to God, if you're not praying, if you don't have those scriptures, if
Mm-hmm.
you don't have something that you're meditating on to help you while you are caring for someone else, it's inevitable that you may not make it. There's sometimes where
Mm-hmm.
the patient has gotten better and the
Right.
caregiver has died.
That's a
And I
lot
was like, how did that happen? But what
because
happens is
caregiver
it is stuff.
that it, listen, you I saw it so often. There was this one lady, she stands out to me because there was one thing that you just said about having that connection with God. So there was this one lady, and her husband had transplant. He was transplanted 3 months maybe before my husband was. And my husband saw him. They were in physical therapy together. It was the weekend for Easter, and
Hmm.
he was doing bad. We had seen him before, and he was okay, but then he had been out in our hospital at least a couple times after he'd had his transplant. This time, like, all jokes aside, just to describe what he looked like, death was walking with him. That's how he looked. He looked like he was ready to go. He looked tired. He looked like he was about to give up. And his wife was there with him. It was the Thursday before Good Friday, and her brother was there, and we were talking. There were caregivers that were talking. It was two of us talking, and then this other wife came and she joined in the conversation. And my husband and her husband were talking, and the brother who was helping her with him. But they were talking, and while we were talking, I looked at her and I said, he can't breathe. I said, but you're not breathing. And she was like, what are you talking about? I stood next to her. Well, I stood in front of her, and I said, I held her hands. Like I stood out and I did like this. And she put her hands in my hand. And I said, can you just breathe? Can you breathe for me? It took her 5 minutes. That's where the 5 minutes came from. It took her 5 minutes to take a breath, a deep breath, so that literally you could see the stress come down. She wasn't breathing, she wasn't living. And like you said, she was knocking on death's door and she was ready for him to give up because she was ready to give up. But she wasn't even acknowledging it. And he was so ready to give up. And the reason I bring this point up is because, like you said, the connection to God. Whenever we were about to leave, like, I talked to her, and she was like, she did not realize it was even Good Friday. You lose track of time whenever you're not taking care of yourself. She didn't realize it was Good Friday. Now, there were holidays that we had. We couldn't be around people just because he was so sick, but we still knew what was going on. We still knew the holidays. She didn't know it. She was like, it's Good Friday. And I don't even realize it. She said, God sent you as an angel today. I was like, no, ma'am. I said, God just needed you to be reminded that you needed to take time for yourself. And before we left, I prayed with her, but then I asked her husband, because you don't ever know anybody's religious affiliation and you don't want to impose, but I touched him and I said, do you mind if I pray for you? And he said, yes. Now, this is a testimony in how God works. He said, yes. I prayed for him and he started crying. I prayed for him and just gave him I just said what needed to be said. I just said what God was giving to me. I got finished praying, and this man said, I felt God. I'm trying to remember how long it was after that, because he had to go in the hospital afterwards. They literally took him from um, rehab that day and put him in the hospital. He was just that sick. He'd been in the hospital a couple times. They took care of him. We would see the doctors, and the doctor said, I don't know what y'all did, but they knew it was crazy. They knew that there had been a prayer. They knew, but when that man, he was like, I feel like the man touched me, like whenever he, like from my arm to his arm, God did a thing that day in his heart, because he acknowledged that he didn't believe in God like that later on. And he got better. It was several months, because we didn't see them probably for another 8 to 10 months, but he got better, and he's continuing to get better. But that's what, there has to be some type connection, and God will send you places. And the thing about it is, those scriptures, those prayers, because like I said, what if somebody can't pray for themselves? As much faith in God as I have, some days I couldn't do it. Like I didn't have the capacity. And how many people who are leaders in ministry are going to tell you that they don't have the capacity to pray? Some people don't want to acknowledge it. But that's why those prayers are there, because someone needs it, even if they just read it really quickly. And they just remember, you know what, I can go here and I can just look at a prayer while I go through. And she was at the point where she was losing herself so much. Statistically, caregivers die quicker than the person that they're caring for, because they lack being well, because they've given so much of themselves and they've not taken care of themselves. That was one conversation that I had with some of the medical staff during transplant, because they saw the journal and they were like, you know what, a lot of caregivers, their health declines more rapidly than their person they're caring for, because their person gets well and then their health declines, and then they need someone to care for them, or they're going straight to their grave. I said, not me, not so. Mm-mm. That's not the plan that God has for me. So it was
Yes.
important for me to create not just the journal. I'm working on the book. I'm working on the book. It's a labor
I
of love.
understand.
It is a labor of love.
I understand. Yes, I
Yeah.
understand. But
Yeah.
I do want to thank you so much for being with us tonight on the Queen's Couch. And so, as we wrap up, what would be one encouraging word you would give to a caregiver at this moment where they just don't know what to do? What would be a word that you would give to them, they that would help push them just a little bit further?
Take your 5 minutes. Please take your 5 minutes. Acknowledge where you are, and remember, you have someone that not only loves you, but supports you, is there for you. And not only is God going to show them to you, He is going to let them reach out to you. Take the help.
Thank you so much, Coach Tiffany. You have been with Coach Tiffany Myers. She is a caregiver's coach. She also has an amazing journal, the Caregiver's Journal, and you can get that journal at www.tiffany.l.myers.consulting, or you can reach out to her on Instagram and Facebook at Tiffany Myers. And so it has been such a pleasure to have you on the Queen's Couch. Caregivers are very special to my heart, because they take care of so many things and sometimes they forget about themselves. But thank you
Yes.
for sharing your story tonight. I thank God for your story and how it has pushed you to help someone else and to be there for someone who may not know that, hey, I have people around me who are here to help me, support me, and I can make it as I care for my loved ones. And so, thank you so much. And so,
Thank
I am
you.
elated to have had you on tonight. And so, we are wrapping up. You have been on the Queen's Couch, and this is the place where queens collaborate and do not collide. We will see you next week as we have a triumphant story of one woman who has gone through adversity, but she has come out on top and wants to share what God has done for her. So thank you so much for being on the Queen's Couch. We will see you next week. Hello and welcome to the Queen's Couch podcast with our amazing host, Dr. Tanika Victoria. She curates a space for women where all women are encouraged to collaborate and do not collide. Join us on the couch tonight.